Thank you. Okay, and then we'll get our gallery view back. Good. I'm going to share my screen in a moment. But what we're doing is a brief recap of the story of the Nazir, and then an exploration into the mind of Ruth Calderon and see what she does with it. So I'm sharing my screen. There we are. Taking a moment to make sure it gets there. Okay, and then you can move this over. So
Sure, I was distracted by the kids.
Oh, the kids, it's so cute.
Lovely.
Yeah. Okay, Shimon the righteous said, so remember, this is the Talmudic story, excuse me, it's from the Tosefta. We talked last week about the Tosefta being an early text, pre-Gemara, at the time of the Mishnah. There's a chat. Okay. Oh, okay, thank you, Michael. He's just texting me that David might come in. Great. In all my days, says Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik Haya Omer, Margot. Thank you for your Pirkei Avot wisdom last week. So Shimon HaTzadik, as I said, is one of the earliest, I wouldn't even call him a rabbi, proto-rabbi era, like the beginning of the rabbinic era, but he's a Kohen Gadol. He said, in all my days, I never ate the guilt offering of a Nazir except once. And here's the story. There was once a Nazir who came to me from the south, and I saw that he had beautiful eyes and a fair countenance and a head of curly locks. I said to him, my son, why did you see fit to destroy such lovely hair? He said to me, I was shepherding in my town, and I came to draw water from the spring. And I looked at my reflection, and my evil inclination surged over me and sought to banish me from the world. I said to it, speaking to his evil inclination, evil one, you had nothing to provoke me with except something that is not yours, something that will in the future become dust and worms and maggots. I shall shave your hair off for the sake of heaven. I lowered my head and kissed him, and I said, my son, may there be many like you in Israel who do God's will. It is about such a Nazir that the Torah says, if a man or woman shall clearly utter a vow, etc., etc. This is the Nazir that we want in the Torah. Okay. Here goes Ruth. Any questions or comments before we jump in to the creative rendering of this narrative? Okay. No, we're good. Okay. For those who may, I don't know if you hear it on the Zoom, if you hear the background music, there's a, what is it, an Akiva celebration of some kind. Can you see if the doors maybe another room? I mean, it's lovely, but I find it also kind of distracting. From time to time, there's like a Chagigat Chumash,
Yeah.
Chagigat Sidur, I don't know, whatever it is today. Oh, they're singing Shalom Aleichem. It's very sweet.
They do have a lot of those things. I went to so many when the kids were at school.
And it's the way to
Yeah.
get the parents.
Oh,
and
my
the
goodness. They're
grandparents.
so
yeah.
delightful. They are so sweet, those kids.
Michael, are you okay on Zoom? Can you hear us? I'm not sure if you're saying that you can hear.
Mm.
Texting me. Yes. Okay. Fantastic. Okay. Great. And Louise back. Thank you. That actually did help.
Yeah.
All right. Here we go. The temple stood silent. The high priest, Shimon the righteous, was accompanied by the patter of his own footsteps on the stone floor as he traversed the great holy space. He marched forward enveloped in darkness and cold, as in a cave of marble and stone. As he walked, his heart fluttered on account of the cold and his cough and his general sense of discomfort. So we're setting the scene. I realize, oh, this is what I need. We're setting the scene of the physical coldness and the flutter of his heart, which later we'll think of the flutter of the heart very differently. Here it's because of the cold. It was the end of winter on the Temple Mount, with the daily routine of worship and the succession of priestly watches coming and going. So she's chosen a particular season The text didn't tell us what season we were in. And she's chosen to tell us how the priests are kind of ho-hum, going and coming and kind of routine. In spite of the appointed priests' attempt to perform the temple service in public ceremoniously and to ascribe an aura of majesty to the mundane, everything seemed tired and worn. The aching bodies immersion in cold water before dawn. So there was like a mikveh in the temple, on the Temple Mount, that they would immerse every day. And on Yom Kippur, several times, every time he changed his clothing, the golden clothing, the linen clothing, into the Holy of Holies, out the Holy of Holies, every time he immersed, I think 5 times that day. So it was like a part of their office, so to speak, part of their
Amazing they
work.
didn't die of pneumonia.
And it must have been cold. It was not heated. They didn't spend that long there, just a quick dunk.
Jeez.
So this immersion, and then the lowing of cows, the anticipation of sunrise, the call to draw lots for the sacrificial slaughter, the sprinkling of blood, the water libation, the saints, the knives, the chopped wood, like all the daily meetings I need to do in the office, all the routines I need to get done. And actually, in many ways, it's describing daily minyan. This was their equivalent of daily prayer. Like you go in and you mumble your mumbles and leave and like that. It's routine. Ritual can easily become routine. The requirements of the sacrificial service broke up the day into an infinite number of ritual ceremonies at intervals, extending from the clearing of the altar at sunrise to the burning of incense at sunset. So Ruth Calderon is being super accurate on what they are doing, what the rituals would have been in the morning, what they've been at the end of the day. And so she realizes that she can paint a picture of a full day of activity that is repetitive. Shimon the righteous viewed the temple as a great factory. There was much work to do, but the boss was far away and the workers were lazy. That is a direct quote from Pirkei Avot.
Really?
Yom Katzar, v'hamalacha meruba. The day is short, the work is plentiful. Baal habayit dochek, the owner is knocking, is sort of waiting for the results. V'ha amelim atzel, Baal habayit dochek v'ha poalim atzelim, and the workers are lazy. So she's just choosing to weave in from a different source. This lesson in that context has to do with like, we are here to serve God, and we should be rising to that challenge, and we shouldn't be getting lazy. But the metaphor she brings right into here in the temple, the factory where the boss is far away. He sang to himself an old priestly song, "For you silence is praise," as he pattered down the long corridor. I couldn't figure out the Hebrew translation of what she might be quoting there. "For you silence is praise." So he had some kind of personal mantra or song, something that kept him going in his daily grind. He nearly fell when his foot caught yet again in the loose tile that he had asked a young priest to fix on more than one occasion. So these young, they're lazy. These young priests. A group of newly ordained priests passed before him, their uniforms clinging to their bodies unattractively, like a band of prisoners. We've gone from the factory now to the prison. I mean, it's pretty harsh. As if that weren't unbearable enough. I mean, I think she's a little heavy-handed here, but okay. He then had to go out to the gate of the women's gallery. By the way, the women's gallery was not full of women. That was the name of that section, the Ezrat Nashim, which would be the place that on massive gatherings at the temple, like on Sukkot, for example, that the women's gallery might have been full of women, that there would be masses of people. But it's just called the women's gallery right now. You don't have to imagine that women are hanging out there. Just saying. So he's going to that gate and wait there for a Nazir who had become impure, and as there was no other senior priest available to accept his sacrifice. A Nazir, as described in the Torah and detailed in the Mishnah, was one who took a vow to abstain from the fruit of the vine, from cutting his hair, and from contact with the dead. We mentioned that last time. Those are the 3 things. It was a common practice. One who vowed to be a Nazir and failed to uphold his abstention from any of these 3 activities was obligated to come to the temple so as to shave the hair that had grown during the period of his vow and bring a guilt offering. Shimon the righteous, who was also known as Shimon ben Honyag, reacted harshly to any Nazir who had become impure. He believed that people vowed too rashly, making light of the holy name. So this is, again, the internal critique of Nazirut, of this Nazirite vow, is that, number one, who are you to think that you need to elevate yourself? Number two, why are you vowing? Like, you want to do something, fine, but vowing in the name of God binds you to this, and you're taking God's name in vain almost. And then if you fail because you accidentally drank some wine you forgot you were Naziring this month, like then you have to come bring this sacrifice. So he looks down on these people automatically for so many reasons. And so for his entire tenure as high priest, he never ate of the guilt offering of any Nazir who had become impure. On each such occasion, the Nazir would return home with a shaven head, and Shimon the righteous would release the birds brought as a sacrificial offering from the roof of the temple. I don't even want your sacrifice.
But they still can be Nazirs.
You can.
They've now been punished. Their hair is cut.
Then their
They-
Nazir time is over. That ends their Nazir time.
Okay, so they can't, after they've
They're-
sinned or failed
Well,
to
they
be.
failed to, so it's almost like they have to expiate themselves of their vow by bringing this sacrificial
Okay.
offering
And then
because they
they're-
couldn't live up to that
Okay.
vow. But that then kind of, they bring this guilt offering and it exempts them back into normal life now.
Okay,
Their
But no
Nazirite
more
vow is
Nazir
over.
for them. That's okay.
I don't know if you could then try it again.
I'm just curious.
I don't know, that I don't know. I don't know. I haven't
I was
learned
just-
that in depth in
I
that
don't
way,
know either.
but this moment then means go home and drink wine, do whatever you want.
Thank you.
When he raised his eyes and saw the figure waiting beside the gate. So we've laid the groundwork, we've laid the scene, and now I've been learning in creative writing terms, the inciting action. What's called the inciting incident,
Yeah,
right? The incident that's gonna now cause a
Yeah.
change for him.
bring
The
the conflict that's going
Yes,
to.
yes. The high priest's heart stirred. We saw his heart before, which was frozen and cold and pitter patter. Ugh. Now his heart is stirred, though he did not know why. So it's like he senses something before his mind understands what's going on for him. The beauty of the young lad was apparent from afar. His body was erect and his legs were tanned and strong. By the way, if he's tanned, what do we know about him? He's
Outdoors.
Yeah, he's an outdoor
Physical, very
type.
physical
Right,
type,
right.
yes.
He's not a scholar, he's a shepherd. It was clear from his stance that the stone floor of the temple was foreign ground for him, that he was used to walking in sand. So he's like a man of the earth. He's earthy, he's physical, he's tanned. And I mean, Shimon HaTzadik, he just lives in this marble stone edifice. His flowing hair had grown wild and fell over his face in curly locks like Samson. We talked about Samson last week as the epitome of the Nazir. So this guy also, his strength, his physicality maybe, and his hair.
Also, the sun images like this, we've had the
Mm.
cold and the dark, the
Thank
stone,
you.
and here's
Yes,
tanned and
yes.
soft
here's the
light.
ray of
and-
light,
yes,
exactly.
Yes,
Thank you. Yeah, and Marilyn.
warmth. I mean, you have the
Mhm.
impression of warmth.
Mhm, mhm.
There seems to be many overtones carried forth from Lech, I never say it correctly.
Lachish, Rav, Lachish,
yeah.
yeah, with the bandit, yeah.
was
Oh,
thinking
okay.
yeah.
It's the
Oh,
same
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Well, she's got- I mean, I think she
She's
has
got a
some
little
kind
bee
of
in her bonnet,
agenda
yeah.
about
She takes the
what
death
she-
plate and moves
yeah.
it directly into
what she thinks about yeshiva students and how disconnected they are
Is she
from
LGBT?
reality.
Physical
Oh,
beauty.
No,
is-
No, but what she thinks about yeshiva students being sheltered and cloistered
oh.
and in the stone and out of the world.
No, I think you were
Is that what you
reacting
meant?
to the beauty of the
Yes, I'm just saying she did
dwelling
it
on the
in
beauty of this boy,
Oh.
of this young man, yeah.
Oh, that he's attracted to this
Yeah.
man.
Or
Okay.
who knows, but I mean,
Elements.
yes,
are
yes, I agree with
attractive.
you. I thought of that too. I did
So
think of that too.
She's lifted.
Maybe,
it.
yeah.
I mean, you know.
I was going more on this theme of the scholar cloistered in their ivory tower, as opposed to the outsider who understands the world out there. and what happens when the two of them collide.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that with the bandit and.
Yeah, that's what I was
yeah,
thinking.
racial-
But yeah, there's also, I mean, there's a lot of physicality and there's an
Yeah.
allure to this young man. But he falls in love with himself. That's gonna be the story. Marilyn's face is hard to.
I can't play poker.
No. I
I'm
understand.
just-
You're saying that he's attracted to the young lad. That's what you're saying. No?
Yes, but to me,
say
it's
it.
very interesting that there are specific repeated elements
Uh-huh.
that to her indicates attraction of
Oh.
a yeshiva, of a person who is more cloistered to a person who is more involved with the outer world. Not that this man knows more than the yeshiva person or is more worldly or anything
It's
like
the,
that.
it's the
But the
virility
physicality.
versus the
Impotent.
aesthetic, the
Yeah,
aesthetic.
Yeah.
And that's-
But remember, her project is bringing secular Israelis into the Beit Midrash.
Oh, this guy would appeal to
That's
the
her
secular
project.
Israelis, yes.
And she is part of this, the secular yeshivas and understanding that Talmud text is not just for those yeshiva boys with the long and the tzitzis, right? It's for
Oh, yes.
even the kibbutz Israelis and the army, the soldiers, the ethnically diverse Israel, the secular Israel. She wants them to learn Torah and Talmud on their own terms. That's what Ruth Calderon is a part of.
That's
why
what
she-
I'm objecting
Yeah.
to.
You're
I-
objecting.
Well, it's not literary. The focus is not literary. It is propaganda.
Oh,
And this,
yeah.
I find this hard to deal with.
She has an
get it.
agenda.
I get it.
Anyway, but
She has a
that's only because I
perspective.
live in Canada
But-
and I have the freedom.
But I don't have a problem with an agenda. She is bringing her perspective.
Mhm.
Agenda, I don't mean that in a pejorative way. She has a perspective. She writes from her perspective. Thank you. I want you to flag that, Marilyn.
Mhm.
Don't be shy.
Yeah, no.
A ray of soft light pouring through the cracks in the wall struck his hair. The expression on his face was serious. And though he stood silent, his head was not lowered in submission. So he knows what he's here to do. He knows why he's brought himself here. It's not in shame. The novice priests cleared out of the gallery respectfully and left the Nazir alone with the high priest. The priest turned to the long-haired lad and said testily, "Son, why do you see fit to destroy such lovely hair?" But his tone did not unsettle the Nazir. So he's trying to throw him off. Who are you? What's going on? And the Nazir stands firm. He looked at the priest with wide eyes, and after a pause, he began to speak. "I was shepherding my father's flocks, and I went to draw water from a spring. The Nazir's story drifted from the southern desert to a strip of good earth south of Hebron to the shepherd's dwelling place. Briefly, he described growing up among the flocks. His story was humble, but his refusal to get married and his lonely days with the flocks seemed to the high priest to reflect the pride of youth. Pride meaning religious pride. I'm a loner, I'm an ascetic, something like that. I think that's what he's getting at. The lad was drawn to become a Nazir. He vowed to abstain from the fruit of the vine and grew his hair wild, meaning that's a hubris, that's an act of hubris to become a Nazir. In his journeys through the desert, he would search for signs, listening for that still small voice in the echo that came from the caves, praying. Remember, the still small voice is a reference to God's presence in that stillness. So he fancies himself a prophet of some kind. On that fateful day, when he saw his reflection in the spring, she chooses not to tell it because she knows we've read the Talmud piece. He doesn't really, she does tell it, but she tells it here. I can't express what I'm trying to say. Let's read it. On that fateful day when he saw his reflection in the spring, he was walking alone. The sleepy cattle had spread out across the plain. Thirsty from walking, he headed for the spring, that small pool of water that was the shepherd's favorite spot. It was a round fountain springing from the depths, ringed with high grass and shaded from the sun. The Nazir lay down beside the spring, delighting in the beauty of the place and in his solitude. When thirst overcame him, he approached the water to take a sip. As he drank, he gazed at a section of the water that was silvery and peaceful. He stood staring intently at his reflection for a long while, washed over by intense desire, inexplicable thirst, and all-consuming longing. Okay, so something in his body is clicking. His hair, which had grown long during the weeks that he had held out as a Nazir, had become like a crown upon his head, distinguishing him from the common people in his village. He had seldom seen his reflection. And so for a moment, he did not recognize himself. I mean, I think that's common, right? Who would have a mirror? Like that's
In those
something-
days. Well,
In those days, yeah. He did not know who he was. I mean, there's also a metaphysical kind of like, who am I moment here. He forgot the flocks and his father and saw just his face. So he forgets his job. He forgets his lineage. He's enamored with his own reflection, the expression on his forehead and the loveliness in the look of his eyes, the enchantment. He extended his arm toward the curls of his hair, toward the strength that revealed itself in his new image. He lifted his hair from his brow, and a dim light burned in his cheek, forehead, and eyes. Twirling his hair around his finger, he smiled at his reflection. The whiteness of his teeth
Jeez.
flashed between healthy cheeks that were as pink as those of a woman. Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
When his body was focused, awake, and hungry, he lengthened his glance, feeling drawn to touch a part of his skin. He stripped off his cloak, bended his knees so as to see better, to touch and to caress the cheek reflected in the water. His reflection trembled and scattered into dancing circles, like, uh-oh, that's not real. A strong sense of desire engulfed him. He slipped into the pool and immersed himself in all that beauty, trembling from the coldness of the water. Hyssop brushed against his back, and the light broke in the water. His body was aflame, beating like a great heart in the water. He was one with the reflection. He was the spring, and he was the sky. He's like totally caught up in himself. Suddenly, he opened his eyes, flooded with guilt. So there's the moment where it changes. And she writes about this, that like, until this point, this is the story of the Greek myth of Narcissus. But now he, like his super ego kicks in, we could say, taming his id. She didn't go 40 and I just went there. But he opens his eyes, flooded with guilt. His conscience tortured him and he cried out, "Evil one, not yours, worm and maggot." She doesn't even go through the whole, that's what I mean by that. Like, she knows we've read the original, so she wants us to have that, but then she gets to tell it in her own way. And after bursting into tears, Lord, Lord, he prays. He nearly drowned in his tears and in the water of the spring. His hair, heavy with water, drew him downward. So he almost drowns. With considerable exertion, he climbed up above the surface of the rock. His entire body was exhausting. Feeling faint, he swore to shave off his hair for the sake of heaven, to annul the vow he had taken to become a Nazir, which had led him to pride and self-adoration. So he comes to, on his own, the realization that a Nazirite vow is about pridefulness. And so I came, he said. And he did not say any more. His eyes were closed when he finished speaking. Should we finish reading it and then, okay, let's keep reading. The Nazir's cheeks burned. The high priest cast an attentive glance toward the great gates. The lad's account reverberated within him. In the silence, he approached the Nazir and kissed him on the head. The priests in the temple had never seen anything like it. Shimon the righteous was walking side by side with the young Nazir, the two carrying a sacrificial offering of birds and 2 loaves. The honey-colored light of dusk poured through the great stone windows. The impression made by the holy place on the young man from the south was readily apparent and reminded the priest of the temple's tremendous power. He tried to remember when he last felt that excitement. He realized that a life of holiness had become habitual for him. When he stood next to those officiating in the temple between the sacrifice and the sprinkling of the blood, the high priest knew that it was he who would shave the curly locks of the Nazir from the south, and he who would burn them on the altar. After all, it would be his very soul that the lad would shave off for the sake of heaven. So he is caught up in the process of the Nazir's own awakening. He's influenced by this young man's passion for God and for righteousness. And he learns a lesson from him. And then, I mean, she goes off into narcissists and all that. So I'll leave this on the screen if you want to look at it.
I have a comment.
Comments, questions,
Yeah.
thoughts,
Um,
curiosities.
I wonder if the high priest is touched by the story or by the fact that he seemed to have had a spiritual experience, right? He was one with the water.
The Nazir.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
So is it that story, that part of the story that touched him, or it's the fact that he,
Yeah, by him telling of his own spiritual awakening.
yes,
The high priest himself has a spiritual awakening,
yes.
which is amazing. Like the person at the top is still humble enough to learn from this young lad. And the person at the top, the holiest of holies, can also get a little bit
Jaded.
lazy. I don't know.
Yeah, she set up the
jaded.
beginning of the story to show with the cold and the all he could see was the negatives of, the workers, the lazy workers,
Right.
and this wasn't right and that
And he's
wasn't
been
right.
critical of them.
And he's been critical. And so he's sunk into, he's lost touch with the spiritual side of his vocation.
Right.
And now he's in the light with this tanned.
Young
And,
man.
yeah, I mean, it's a very theatrical, kind of melodramatic thing. But the whole narcissist thing, the boy in love with his own reflection,
Uh-huh.
there's, it has so many reverberations today with people identifying, finding their authentic other gender inside. And I mean, this is the
I was
kind of-
thinking actually more along the lines of selfies, people obsessed with their
I
selfies.
thought of that too, that he would very rarely have seen his own reflection, but
Yeah.
today that's all people see is their
Yeah.
own reflection,
Yeah.
and they hardly ever see anything else. Yeah, it's a
When
good,
I was traveling, I was thinking about, I forgot where I was. I had this instinct. There was a group of people and one of them was taking a selfie of the group together in the
yeah.
airport going, whatever it was. And I had this instinct to go over and say, oh, would you like me to take a photo for you? And then I realized, no, they actually don't.
They don't want
Because the selfie is an art
Yeah.
now in itself.
Yeah.
And you just, you don't need an actual portrait, you need a selfie.
But selfie pictures are always a little distorted because
Yeah,
the
yeah.
person taking it is the one that's
Is it-
always kind of in
Yeah,
front,
yeah,
bigger.
yeah.
You see them bigger
It's
than
about
the rest.
themselves and everyone
Yeah,
is in
yeah,
the background.
Yeah.
What did you want to say?
Exactly what I was going to say,
Uh-huh.
that the person taking the pictures in the foreground
Yeah,
and
Yeah.
sublimates the others. Very
it
interesting.
means they're the
that
star of their
perspective.
own story.
And it's actually, like you said, distorted
Yes, they are
because
distorted.
they're
But it's
bigger.
for social media's sake, right?
Yeah.
When I'm taking a selfie, I know I'm gonna put it up there for other people to look
Mhm.
at.
Mhm.
So it's part of my story, my
Yeah.
Facebook, my Instagram story, whatever. We even use the word story in these apps. I'm
Yes.
so adept, but yeah, I see hands in the Zoom room. So just a second, I'm gonna give Gloria a chance and then I see Farla. I don't know if that was a hand or a,
Yes.
okay, go ahead. You're unmuted already, Farla. So take the floor and then Gloria, you'll be next.
My question is, does this happen to women also? Becoming a Nazir?
Yes, actually, we talked about this briefly last week, just that the verse explicitly says, The verse that he quotes, a man or a woman who wishes to become a Nazir. Yes. Yeah.
And
It
is
would
it
be long already.
permanent, or can they retract and go back to where they were?
It's never meant to be permanent. It's usually for a certain explicit amount of time. Someone could say, I want to be a Nazir for 2 months, a year. In fact, the default, if someone says, Harini Nazir, I am a Nazir, and they don't specify a length of time, the default was 1 month. That would be the baseline Nazirite vow.
It's really like.
Thank you for clarifying. And go ahead, Gloria.
Okay, I just wanted to comment on the selfie issue and how it relates to this story. Is you're right, a group selfie, there is a distortion in terms of where you're standing and who's holding the camera, etc. But I also think that it shows us that sometimes we're loath to see ourselves truly as other people see us. We want to be in control of the narrative. And I think that that's part of the issue of the Nazir looking in the water and dispersing his reflection. It's anyway, to me, it's subjecting ourselves to how we appear to the world, not how we think we are just with our own opinions. It's there's that vulnerability, but that's what makes the world work, is that interdependent, that we need to be there to give each other feedback and objectivity.
We need to be getting out of our own heads sometimes. Nice. I see Esther had something to say, and then Margot here in the room. Go ahead,
Yes,
Esther.
I missed last week, so I'm behind and I'm trying to get my head around everything here. But can a Nazir is it always the person himself who decides that he or she is a Nazir, or sometimes is it
Yes.
done by other people?
No,
like
it
Miriam?
has to be their own, it's their own vow. It's their own vow. And something that I want to bring back that we mentioned last week, so it's okay if you missed it, because I wanted to mention it again. The Nazir is an experience of asceticism of sorts, an incomplete experience of asceticism, meaning we don't have the monk that hides away and doesn't marry and doesn't, eat nice foods at all. But we have this Nazir vow option for someone who wants to express their religious fervor through some kind of deprivation. So I'm not going to drink wine or have any grape products. I'm not going to cut my hair nicely. I'm not going to be around a corpse. But it is an approximation of the Kohen experience on some level.
I was just going to ask that.
Corpse piece. Yeah. So I wanted to come back to this now that we've seen the way she talks about the bond between the priest and the Nazir. It's the priest and the quasi-priest, walking shoulder to shoulder there. And the priest needed to learn from this Nazir something that he couldn't learn for himself. Something about religious passion that he, maybe because, look, as a Kohen, you're born into it. It's not a choice. A Nazir had to make a choice. So maybe it requires another level of commitment. I don't know.
Isn't it about spiritual humility?
But he doesn't like Nazirs because he thinks they're not humble. And then he finds one like this who actually is.
He's actually fulfilling the real ideal
Right,
of the Nazir.
right. And that's where then Shimon HaTzadik can learn, has something to learn.
So he must have seen a lot of phony Nazirs at this time.
It seems like it was in vogue to
Ah,
do this kind of thing,
well, that makes sense.
the way that she tells it anyway. So Esther, does that
Yeah,
relate to-
it does. But the one I was thinking of was when Miriam was separated because of, I don't even remember what
that was
story.
leprosy, Sarah?
Yeah, that's right. But that had nothing to do with Nazir.
No, and that's not voluntary. That's when one is stricken and one needs to be separated. But it is also this state of concern for impurity, but she becomes the source of impurity. Yeah. It's different. It's related. It would be, yeah.
Seems like there's a blurry line.
Yeah, there's some connection perhaps, but this is a different state. This is something
Okay.
that someone voluntarily takes upon themselves.
Okay.
Margot.
I'm curious because I think I don't fully understand the last line about the vow. This statement,
About the battle?
number 6:2.
Wait, where?
That last line, it is about such a Nazir that the Torah says. If
Oh.
a man or woman shall clearly utter a vow. What are they, what is, it is about such a Nazir.
The last line.
Yeah.
I think, so I read it as, I'm actually just pulling up the original.
It is
Talmud
about
text to make
such a
sure it's,
Nazir.
Is
Is that a general statement about taking vows? You know, for all of us?
Okay, so she actually leaves out, oh no, she doesn't leave it out. May there be many like you in Israel who do God's will. So the Torah says, if a man or a woman takes a vow. So is he trying to say, you're the kind of person that should be taking this vow because you're sincere in it? Is that?
So it's telling us to mind our vows? What am I?
No, I think he's saying this is what an ideal Nazir should be, not
Okay.
what it's maybe become. These people.
Because we're on
don't,
the high holidays, we're forgiven our vows.
yeah,
That has, it's
we're still
not,
not encouraging Nazirhood. Nazirness, we're still not encouraging someone to become a Nazir, but it's as if he's saying like, yeah, this is what a true Nazir person could be.
okay. So it's strictly talking about vows pertaining to the Nazirship.
Yeah. Isho
Okay,
Isha Kifle
that's-
Nidor Neder Nazir, the vow of a Nazirite. Shall
Which-
clearly utter a vow. Yeah, the dot there, just the rest of the verse actually in the Hebrew continues to utter a vow of Nazir, a
Okay.
Nazir vow, a
Okay,
Nazirite
okay.
vow,
So that's that.
vow to be a Nazir for God.
So he's.
So it's not
sworn-
about vows in general, no.
Where did the Nazirship, where does it start? In the Old Testament? Where do we first read about it? Right?
This is it.
And then he's scorning it. So that,
Bamidbar and Parshat Naso, the second
He's sort of-
parsha from Bamidbar, and it was, yeah, it was something people did,
okay.
but you
He's,
know, like many religious constructs, it's like people are doing it for the wrong reasons. So, I mean, there's, she's coming through on that too.
right,
But I mean, her choice of this story,
right.
where he's critiquing religious fervor, because it slides into pride. Like, oh, you're wearing so many black hats and things, you know, making you look like you're so religious. I'm projecting that on her. I don't know if that's what she would say this equivalent is in the modern world, but it's like, why do you have to go be a Nazir? It's so prideful. Just be a good person. And then he finds it, but she redeems Nazirhood, because and Shimon HaTzadik redeems Nazir, because when you find someone who's doing it for the right reasons,
It's then.
who's sincere, and then catches himself in a moment of pride, and then says, no, I need to come back from that. Like that redeems the religious fervor, as that there's nothing inherently wrong with religious fervor. It's just in the wrong hands, it becomes prideful.
I find this whole idea of the long hair and the cutting your hair, letting your hair grow, covering your hair, like it's such a motif in all religions, like the hair being the beauty, you know, that's where the beauty resides. It's sinful to show your hair.
The hair in here is like unkemptness. With the sota also, just after the Nazir comes sota. It's near each other in the Bible, and this part of the sota ritual is the humiliation of uncovering her hair, of letting her hair go. And that's where we learn that keeping hair covered or contained is a sign of honor. I don't know how to connect that to Nazir, but I have a lot of people who, yeah.
Perhaps it's because when you expose your hair, you're growing your hair, it's to publicly reveal your temptations. So that's like a sign of Hester, you know, where you're visually put yourself aside, saying this is my time for remediation or
Yeah,
whatever.
that's interesting. I wanted to read just a short piece of Ruth Calderon's parallel with this myth of Narcissus. It's so interesting. Like once you see it, you can't unsee
Yeah.
it. So she says the story of the Nazir from the South parallels the myth of Narcissus. It is fair to assume that the creators of the story of the Nazir were familiar with the Greek myth, and their story is in part a reaction to the problem it poses. The primary difference between the two stories concerns the nature of the supernatural force involved. The gods who intervene in the Narcissus myth with their human-like impulses and motivations, right? The Greek gods are like people. They stand in stark contrast to the transcendental God of the Nazir story who remains at bay. The action in this Nazir story is all the person themselves, not the God. God is just listening, is I don't know, in the background. On account of God's detachment, the Nazir from the South has more freedom than Narcissus, who is locked in a dead-end situation. The Nazir succeeds in changing the course of his life and extricating himself from the bind that paralyzes Narcissus. Like he's stuck and then he unsticks himself. It says that the transformation that takes place within the Nazir is simultaneously physical, mental, and spiritual. On the physical level, he vows to shave his hair and comes to the temple to fulfill his vow. On the mental level, he renounces the evil impulse within him, owning up wholeheartedly to the sins of hubris and self-adoration, abandoning the false allure of external display associated with being a Nazir, this allure of his own body or his own temptation. And on a spiritual level, his vow is a religious act of consecration. By means of his vow, the Nazir returns to living in the presence of God. So he says the paralysis of Narcissus is thus counteracted on each of these three levels. That this is a successful story because he moves, he learns something, and he's able to move forward with this new learning, physical, mental, spiritual. Narcissus is paralyzed, is stuck. And so they unstick the protagonist here to teach the protagonist a lesson and teach all of us, and even the high priest, a lesson.
What happened to Narcissus in the original Greek?
He's paralyzed. He's stuck forever. Isn't he stuck forever?
I don't remember the end of the story.
I think that
He
that
doesn't have self-determination.
Yeah.
But is there sort of an
Isn't he-
epilogue to
He
his,
drowns, no?
does he? Oh, does he drown because
He
he
wants
he
to.
leans over? Yeah, I
He
think
is-
maybe that's it.
So the end of the Narcissus myth. Oh my gosh, not realize it was merely his own reflection. And so he eventually. Yeah, he turns into gold and white flower.
Oh, he's transformed by the
He's-
gods? He's punished?
Once during a summer, he was getting thirsty after hunting, and the goddess lured him to a pool where he leaned upon the water. This is just Wikipedia, and saw himself in the bloom of youth. Narcissus did not realize it was merely his own reflection and fell deeply in love with it,
Mm.
as if it were another young man. Unable to leave the allure of his image, he eventually realized that his love could not be reciprocated, and he melted away from the fire of passion burning inside him, eventually turning into a golden white flower. He
Oh.
becomes he turns into just a flower on the bank of the river.
Okay.
Oh,
See, the Greeks, of course,
whatever.
they exalted physical beauty,
Right.
and that was a value for them. In fact, physical imperfection was, they left babies out on the hillside to die if they
Ugh.
weren't perfect and all that. And Jews weren't allowed to be in the Olympic Games because
Mhm.
they were
Their bodies
circumcised.
were defaced.
So so this obsession with beauty, so interesting because in the Hebrew tradition, so
No,
not.
no, beauty's in the Talmud.
yeah,
We're
we got- we
interested
It's
in it.
there, but it's
We
not.
get
in
beauty,
it.
but we
But we
get
get it-
a beauty that's deeper and more
It's- it's n-
multifaceted and not.
It's never for its own
simplistic.
sake. It's
Yeah,
never for
yeah.
its own sake.
Yeah.
They loved the body for its own sake. I mean, the Olympic Games were, you had to perform naked. That's why the Jews weren't
Yeah,
allowed to
and,
be in.
and the rabbis are yelling, you're like, don't go into these theaters and these shows and.
This is a pagan thing, that nakedness and,
Right,
and exaltation of beauty, human, physical beauty is associated with paganism.
so I wanted to bring this then back in what the Nazir learns. How this then comes back into the temple atmosphere. And one more little excerpt. This is now the very end where Ruth Calderon ends her commenting on this. She says, serving in the temple had become for the priests mundane routine. And she made that up. That wasn't in the original Talmud story, but she's not fabricating it. It's in other places in the Talmud where they're, criticizing the priests for being corrupt or being whatever it might be. The priests were not perfect. In this story, an elderly high priest, jaded and spent, meets a young Nazir animated by vigorous passion. There is a similarity between the two. One is accustomed to his flock and the other to his sanctuary. Both are forbidden to come in contact with the dead, and both are forbidden to drink wine, because a priest in his moment of service cannot be drunk. Both are lonely and seek out holiness amid their prosaic daily routines. Through his encounter with the Nazir from the south, and through the Nazir's confessional outpouring, the high priest reconnects with his former self. He is able to taste once again of holiness. So he finds a reawakening, a spiritual reawakening from this young upstart, this young, eager Nazir. Isn't that nice?
Yes.
We do pay attention. I mean, Lakish, look at how he's described in the.
Yes. Yes.
There's great
Yes.
detail around certain characters in our story, their physical beauty.
Lakish is known as a bandit and physical,
Right.
but it doesn't describe the way she describes his arms and
It's,
his tan body or his whatever. I don't remember what it was. She does create a typology. You know what I just thought of? What's the name of the character in the novel Exodus? The
Yuri, Ari.
Uri, no,
Ari.
Ben
Canaan.
Ari Ben Canaan, this new Jew
Yeah.
of strength, that you could
Oh, right.
be a
Yeah.
Jewish hero that isn't pale and scholarly.
Have you seen Fauda? You certainly.
Oh, yeah, no, I avoid those things.
Oh,
I
do
can't,
you? Oh my
can't.
God, I just
can't
watched the
do
fourth
that.
season.
I can't do drama and suspense and murder
Oh,
and.
It's so amazing.
But that's the new Israeli. which-
Yes,
But
yes.
that's Zionism.
Yeah, that's a post.
Go to the land.
Yeah,
Own
yeah.
Land and.
Actually, that's not what Fauda is about at all. It's not about.
No, but
Zionism.
it's
no,
the
not
next
Saudi.
generation.
No.
Now we're also,
The new Jew.
it's
Yeah.
strategy, it's
Fauda is the new
intelligence, right?
Jew.
It's, yeah,
Unfortunately.
But strength, but physical strength.
it's physical and mental strength. It's the marrying of the two. From what I understand, I've not seen
Of Magna.
anything and I don't want to. I
Watching
can't.
the
I'm
Oh,
not
really?
for it.
Oh.
I don't have, I can't.
The
I can't.
Hunters, anybody, or should I be embarrassed that
What?
I'm loving it?
What?
The Hunters?
I haven't seen
Oh,
it.
it's a Nazi there.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
Did you watch the whole thing?
Yeah.
What did you think of it? I can't.
I can't remember why, but I had issues with it. But anyways, I forget.
I love the way this owl works, that I mean, we can't see it on the screen here because we hit
No.
it. That we just had like your box and your box.
Oh,
Head to head.
oh, that's funny.
That everybody on
funny.
our Zoom can see. I want to ask our friends on the Zoom if there's anything that you want to add in our last 5
I
minutes.
want to say something.
Louis wants to say
Yeah.
something. Farla's saying something. Okay, Farla, go ahead. We won't forget you.
I think the meaning of Fauda is chaos.
Yes.
Oh, really?
Well, it's uprising. It's, yeah.
Oh, I had no idea.
It's
Intifada, Fauda.
riot,
Yeah.
riot.
It's the Arabic word for yeah.
Annie has her hand raised too. Go ahead, Annie. We
I
don't see
wanted-
you, but we
No,
hear
it's
you.
okay, you don't have to. I wanted to say that I recently saw a documentary about the ship, the Exodus, and the true story of what went as opposed to what we have from the movie. And honestly, I was just appalled at the true story of how that ship was treated and how it was apparently rammed by 5 British ships on each side, rammed and destroyed. And like I read the true story of people who were on the ship.
What's the name of the book?
Oh, the book I read was Gertruda's Promise, and she brings a little boy that she promised to save, and she was the nanny, and she brings him on the ship finally. It's a great story because it's a success story. But I also saw the documentary, but I don't
Oh,
remember
I'm sorry, the documentary.
I
Okay.
don't remember. It was something on the Jewish Heritage Foundation, but it had the real people interviewed, like
Oh, wow.
the little boy who was on the ship, and the
Wow.
captain, and apparently Mossad agents were everywhere in France and in the United States, where they bought this rundown ship called the something in Baltimore. They bought the ship that they had dummy companies, and they were buying ships all over the world to transport the Jewish survivors to Israel. It's so much not better and inspiring when you read what really happened instead of
So
the
if
movie.
you want to plug the
What
documentary,
is she referring to? Because I couldn't
it's a
hear.
documentary about the Exodus,
Okay,
the ship.
okay.
But if you come back next week with the name of it or the website or place where people can find it, that would be great.
Yes, I'll look at it. But in the meantime, the book called Gertruda's Promise is excellent.
Gertrude.
Actually, the Leon Uris novel is pretty, I remember how riveting it was, although I tried to reread it again today. It was like schlocky. today, But it does tell. a
I want to
great
give
story.
Louis a chance to get our last word.
About the
No
story.
pressure.
About the story, I find the story very relevant, and
Yeah.
I was wondering while we were reading it, how it could speak to my secular friends.
Oh,
And it reminds me of a story, something that happened when I was teaching grade 2, and I had the student, she was 7, right?
uh-huh.
And she was a girl, and she didn't like herself, she didn't like her image, she didn't like what she looked like.
It's 7.
At 7, it starts very early nowadays.
Mhm.
And I remember we were sitting in a circle and we were talking, and there was this little girl was saying, I don't like myself, I look at myself in the mirror, I just don't find myself attractive. And then the other students started to talk about God and saying that, you're created according to God's image, and
Oh,
it's just not
wow.
fair that you just don't accept who you are. And it reminds me that this story, it has the impact of, because if we were not seeing our images every single day of the year,
Right.
we're just once in a while, maybe we would acknowledge the beauty that we
Wow.
Oh, that's such an
Right.
interesting.
We're
so
so
used to,
over
yes,
obsessed with the mirror.
yes,
You can't walk out the house without glancing at yourself.
yeah. And I was
So
just
it
wondering
leads
if,
to judging ourselves.
and it's really a problem in society, right?
Yeah.
The fact that we just don't love ourselves, we don't
Yeah.
love our image.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I just,
Well, and then that will go back to the social media conversation
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
the touch-ups, right? The
yeah.
photo shop. I don't know, no, but I don't know what it's called when you
Photoshop.
Photoshop is like that old. Whatever, there's,
Anyways,
it's so easy now, like you just filters. the
filters. Yeah,
They put filters. so
social
that no
media
one's
is
looking at their
made to
true
make
image.
people hate the way
Well,
they
it's,
look.
it's
like
made to keep people's attention.
Yeah.
So for the companies to make money, that's it.
Yeah, but I mean, they do it
And,
by
but
preying on your insecurity.
if
In
we
terms
saw
of
our image naturally in a place of beauty, only once every few years,
Yeah,
maybe it would be different. Wow, wow.
Imagine if the Nazir was an extension of the high priest, and the priest, well, I'm saying the same word that you did, only I'm saying it in a metaphorical way, that the high priest recognizes, as you said, himself.
Mhm.
And I think
Mhm.
one has to go even deeper, because I think not only are we ourselves, but we are a reflection of something stardust and divinity. And I think the problem is we don't go far enough, we don't go deep enough.
Well, and in this story, all he sees is his physical reflection, and that's where the evil impulse. can
That's
get
where
him.
narcissism
So
was lost.
he doesn't see
couldn't
the
go
spirit of the
further.
divine or whatever it is underneath the
But this is the
surface.
strength
And he
of,
can't get beneath the surface because he touches the water
it
and it's
disappears.
gone.
Yes,
It
but it's
jumps
also
in.
the element of
This-
religion that brings you deeper,
Mhm,
that
mhm,
brings
mhm,
you to the connectedness.
mhm. Yofi. Let's stop there because we've reached the end
That's
of our
good.
hour. That's a great place.
Very
to stop.
interesting.